Every weekday, at 12:10 p.m., Miriam packed the same lunch and sat at the same corner table in the staff break room at Westfield Elementary. The one beside the window that looked out over the parking lot. Not the courtyard where the other teachers gathered. She'd been doing it for 8 months. Not because she preferred the parking lot view. There was nothing to look at out there. Just minivans and salt-stained asphalt and the occasional crow picking at something near the dumpsters. She sat there because that table had an outlet, and her phone was always at 11% by noon, and she needed it charged before pickup at 3:15. That was the thing about Miriam's life that most people didn't see. Every single decision, no matter how small, had a reason underneath it that had nothing to do with preference and everything to do with math. Which table? Which route home? Which brand of pasta? Which pair of shoes could last another winter without resolving? She was 38 years old. She taught grade 2. And she had been doing this arithmetic in her sleep for almost 2 years now. Since the divorce was finalized and the bank account that used to belong to 2 people became hers alone. Your daughter, Petra, was 6. She had her father's dark eyebrows and Miriam's stubbornness, and she believed, with the complete confidence that only a 6-year-old can have, that everything was basically fine. Miriam worked very hard to make sure Petra kept believing that. The teachers at Westfield were kind people. They weren't unkind to Miriam, not even close. They invited her to things. Drinks on Fridays. The staff potluck in November. The group that walked around the track at lunch on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She said no to most of it, and after a while they stopped asking so often. The way people do when they mistake private pain for preference. They figured she was just someone who liked to be alone. She let them figure that. What she couldn't explain, and didn't try to, was that every one of those invitations required something she didn't have. The drinks cost money, the potluck required a dish, and buying the ingredients would mean something else didn't get bought. The lunch walks required a kind of lightness she couldn't locate in herself, the ability to laugh about nothing, to be in a conversation without calculating simultaneously whether the car payment was going to clear before her direct deposit landed. She smiled at the right moments. She was good at her job. She loved those kids in her classroom with a fierceness that sometimes surprised her. These 7-year-olds who didn't know what it cost to keep the lights on, who brought her drawings of horses and asked if she'd ever been to space. She could be fully present for them, in a way she sometimes couldn't manage for herself. That part, at least, still worked. But the break room table by the parking lot, that was hers. That was the 12 minutes she allowed herself to just sit. Phone charging. Sandwich she'd made at 6 a.m. A book she'd been on page 114 of since September. She rarely got past a paragraph before her mind went somewhere else. But she kept bringing the book, because the act of carrying it felt like a small insistence that she was still a person who read books. That some part of her life still had room for things that weren't survival. She didn't talk much about any of this. Her mother was in Fredericton and called on Sundays, and Miriam told her things were going well, which was true in certain lights. Her closest friend from university, Dawn, lived in Vancouver now, and they texted, and Miriam was careful never to text anything that would make Dawn worry, because Dawn would offer money and Miriam would have to say no, and then something would shift between them, even slightly. And she couldn't afford to lose that either. So she managed. That was the word for it. She managed. The morning everything changed, Miriam was already running late. Petra had spilled orange juice. Not her fault. She'd reached across the table for her backpack and caught the glass with her elbow, and it went everywhere, across the table, across Petra's leggings, across the library book that was due back on Friday. Miriam cleaned it up. She changed Petra's leggings. She blotted the library book with paper towels and hoped for the best. She did not cry, because there wasn't time, and also because she'd gotten very good at deciding not to. They made it to school 4 minutes before the bell, which counted as on time in Miriam's current system of measurement. She kissed Petra at the kindergarten door and watched her run inside, that heavy little backpack bouncing, and then she walked around to the main entrance and became the version of herself she was at school. Capable, cheerful, present. By the time the lunch bell rang, she was tired in the way that had become her default. Not the sharp tired that came from a bad night, but the low hum of it, always there, like a sound you stop consciously hearing, but that's still technically playing. She got her lunch from the staff fridge, said something to Graham from grade 5 about the hockey game last night, because he always wanted to talk about the hockey game, and made her way to the corner table. There were 4 kids in the break room. That was unusual. Students didn't generally use the break room. It was technically staff only, though the rule was loosely enforced. These four were grade 5 or 6, she guessed, and they were huddled at the table nearest the door, eating lunches out of plastic containers and talking in that performing for each other way that kids that age had, louder than necessary, testing what was funny. Miriam sat at her table, plugged in her phone, opened her sandwich. She wasn't paying close attention to them. But after a few minutes she became aware, in the peripheral passive way you notice things in a room without meaning to, that one of the four wasn't talking. 3 of them were. The fourth, a girl with long reddish hair pulled into a loose braid, was quieter, eating her lunch, smiling sometimes when something landed, but not generating the noise herself. Something about the way she sat suggested she was holding herself very still on purpose. And then Miriam heard one of the other kids, a boy with a blue lanyard around his neck, say something. She didn't catch all of it. She caught enough. The words "your mom" and "work at McDonald's" and a sound after it that was supposed to be a joke. The girl with the braid laughed. A little, because she was 11 or however old she was, and she hadn't yet developed the option not to when someone expected it. But her shoulders went up around her ears, and she looked down at her food. Miriam looked at her sandwich. She was not the kind of person who inserted herself into things. She had a whole system built around keeping to herself, around not requiring anything from anyone, around managing. She was very tired. She had a book she'd been on page 114 of since September. She sat there for another minute. Then she picked up her lunch, walked to the other table, and sat down. The 4 kids looked at her with the wide, startled attention kids gave to adults who did unexpected things. "Mind if I sit here?" Miriam said. "The outlet at my table stopped working." This was not true. "I'm Miss Vance." "We know," the boy with the blue lanyard said. "You teach grade 2. "I do. What's everyone's name?" There was a beat. Kids deciding whether an adult asking their name was a threat or just something adults did. And then they went around. The boy was Declan. The girl next to him was Priya. The other boy was Sam. The girl with the braid said her name quietly. "Claudette." "Claudette," Miriam repeated, not making a thing of it, just saying the name the way you said a name when you wanted to acknowledge it had been offered. "Nice to meet you." She ate her sandwich. She asked them the easy questions. What grade, what class, the kind of things that cost nothing, and build the small scaffolding of normal conversation. Declan was the talker. He told her about a science fair project involving electromagnets. Priya showed her something on a worksheet. The conversation found its own shape, and within a few minutes it was 4 kids and 1 teacher eating lunch together in a break room, which was not a remarkable thing on its surface. But Miriam watched Claudette's shoulders come down, slowly, the way you don't notice happening until you look back, and it already has. She didn't say anything directly. She didn't address what she'd overheard. She just stayed at the table, and she made sure Claudette was in the conversation. "Claudette, what did you think of that?" And she kept her voice the same, even, warm, the voice she used with her grade 2s when she was trying to make a classroom feel safe. When the bell rang, the kids gathered up their things. Miriam began folding her lunch bag. Declan and Sam and Priya filed out, already on to the next thing, talking about something in the hallway. Claudette was the last to leave. She stopped at the door and looked back at Miriam. "Thanks," she said, "just that." "Of course," Miriam said. She wasn't sure either of them was entirely certain what was being thanked for. Maybe that was fine. Maybe it didn't need to be named. Claudette left. Miriam sat back down at her table. She plugged her phone back in and picked up her book and stared at page 114 for a moment. She didn't read it. But she sat with the book open in her hands and felt something she had not felt in a long while. Not happy, exactly, not fixed. Nothing had changed about the car payment or the library book or the orange juice stain on page 47. But something adjacent to solid. Like she'd briefly remembered what it felt like to be the person she actually was rather than the collection of calculations she'd been running. She wasn't sure why sitting with 4 kids for 12 minutes had done that, but she noted it, and she moved on with her afternoon. The next day, she had a meeting at lunch and ate at her desk. The day after that, she was back at her corner table. She didn't think about the kids. She had a thing with her landlord about the furnace that was occupying most of her background mental processing. And she was also trying to figure out if Petra needed new winter boots before December, or if she could stretch the current ones another month. Then, at 12:20, someone knocked on the break room door frame. It was Claudette, alone. "Hi," she said. She was holding a small piece of paper folded once. Miriam looked up. "Hi, everything okay?" Claudette walked over and held out the paper. "This is for you." Miriam took it with the same expression she used when her grade 2 students handed her drawings. Open present. Not making it a big moment before she knew what the moment was. She unfolded it. Inside, in careful, slightly oversized handwriting. You didn't have to sit with us, but I think you knew that. Miriam read it twice. Then, she looked up, and Claudette was watching her with that particular look that kids had when they weren't entirely sure if they'd done something right. Eyes a little uncertain. Hands already reaching to take it back if she'd misjudged. Did you write this? Miriam asked. Yeah. Giggle. It's a good note. I wasn't sure if it was weird. It's not weird, Miriam said. She folded it back once, carefully, along its original crease. It's the opposite of weird. Claudette exhaled. This small, barely there release of something she'd been holding. She looked briefly at the outlet, at the sandwich, at the book still on page 114. Do you always sit by yourself? She asked, not unkindly, with the same directness that kids had before they learned that some questions were too direct. Miriam considered the standard answer. Fine, yes, I like the quiet. All the things adults said to move past the question cleanly. Mostly, she said instead, it's a habit I got into. How come? Easier, I guess. She paused. Sometimes when things are hard you kind of stop taking up space, without really deciding to. Claudette nodded, slowly, like she was receiving something rather than just hearing it. Declan didn't mean it to be mean, she said then. About my mom, he doesn't think about stuff before he says it. I know, Miriam said. Some people are like that. It still feels bad. Does, Miriam agreed. Even when you know that's why, it still feels bad. There was a silence between them that was the comfortable kind. The kind that didn't need to be filled. My mom works 2 jobs, Claudette said, not defensively, just as a fact, the way you said something when you wanted to say it to someone who would just receive it. She picks me up at 5:30, sometimes 5:45. Yet she sounds like a hard worker. She is. Claudette looked down at her hands for a second. She's always tired. Miriam was quiet. Mine too, she said, and then, because it was true and because Claudette had offered her something honest and she felt it deserved the same. I'm a mom too. She's in grade 1 here, Petra. I know Petra, Claudette said immediately, and her face changed the way faces changed when something connected. She's in the blue coat. That's her. Her? She's nice. She let a kid borrow her crayons last week and didn't even ask for them back yet. Miriam felt something happen in her chest. The particular feeling of hearing your child described through someone else's eyes, like being handed a photograph you didn't know was taken. That sounds like her. Claudette smiled then, a real one, not the performed one from the break room. You work really hard, too, she said. I can tell. Teachers who care, they look a certain kind of tired. Miriam blinked. She had no idea what to do with that sentence. It was the most precisely observed thing anyone had said to her in months. This 11-year-old had walked into the break room and said it as if it were obvious, because to her it was, because children who had mothers, who were also tired, had become very fluent in that particular language. Yeah, Miriam said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. A bell rang. Not the lunch bell, the first warning for afternoon classes. Claudette glanced at the door. I should go. You should, Miriam agreed. She looked at the folded paper in her hand. Claudette, thank you for this. Claudette shrugged in the way kids shrugged when they meant the opposite. See you tomorrow maybe. Maybe, Miriam said. She did, but not in the break room. The following morning Miriam arrived at school and found something on her classroom door. Taped to the wood frame, just beside the handle, where she'd see it the moment she turned the corner. A small envelope made from a piece of yellow construction paper, folded and tucked with her name written on it in the same careful, oversized handwriting. She stood in the empty hallway for a moment before opening it. Inside were 2 things, a note and a tea bag, chamomile, the kind that came in the yellow box, still in its paper wrapper. The note said, My mom says chamomile helps when you're the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I thought maybe you might need some. Claudette. Miriam stood in that corridor with a chamomile tea bag in one hand and a piece of yellow construction paper in the other, and she did not cry loudly, she never did, but her eyes went very bright for a moment and she breathed in once through her nose, and out slowly, and she just stayed there in that quiet hallway for a little longer than necessary. What undid her wasn't the gesture itself, though the gesture was generous and good. What undid her was the precision of it. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Claudette's mother had said that. Had said it to her daughter. And somewhere in that household, with its 2 jobs and the 5:40 pickup and the hard long days, a woman Miriam had never met had put language to something Miriam had been walking around in for 2 years without being able to name. She made the tea during her prep period. She sat with it, and she let herself feel what she'd been managing not to feel. Just for a few minutes, which was that she was doing this mostly alone. And it was hard, and it had been hard for a long time. She let the feeling be there. Then she put it back and went to teach her grade 2s, who were doing a unit on measurement and who needed her, and she was fully there for them. At lunch, she went to the break room. And at 12:15, Claudette came back. After that, it became a thing. Not formal, not arranged, just something that happened most days. Claudette eating lunch at Miriam's table by the window, the two of them talking or not talking. Sometimes Claudette brought one of the others, Priya, mostly, who turned out to be quietly funny, and who was working on a novel about time travel that she narrated at surprising length. Sometimes it was just the two of them. Sometimes Declan showed up and said something thoughtless and then apologized for it later, which Miriam found she liked about him, that he apologized, genuinely, when he figured out he'd been an idiot. She told Claudette things she didn't usually tell people. Small things. That Petra had made a card for her last week that said, "Best mom in the world," in letters that got smaller as they went because she'd miscalculated the space. That Miriam had put it on the fridge and cried a little after Petra went to bed. That she'd been on page 114 of her book since September, not because she wasn't enjoying it, but because she kept forgetting to let herself. Yet Claudette listened in the way she did. Not trying to fix anything, not offering solutions, just receiving it. She told Miriam things back. About her mother, Vivian, who worked mornings at a pharmacy and evenings at a grocery distribution center, and who still, somehow, made rice and peas from scratch, on Sundays because she said a week without it wasn't a week. About how Claudette had started setting the table on Sunday mornings so her mom could have 5 extra minutes of sitting. About how she'd learned to read a tired face from across a room, because it mattered to know. About 2 months after Claudette left the first note, Miriam got a second envelope. This one was in her school mailbox, not on her door. It was heavier. When she opened it at her desk, there were 2 things inside: a handwritten letter and a gift card to the grocery store 2 blocks from the school. A $40 gift card. She almost couldn't read the letter. Her eyes kept sliding past the words, and then she'd have to start again. But eventually she read it. "Dear Ms. Vance, my name is Vivienne. I'm Claudette's mother. I hope you'll forgive me writing to you like this. Claudette talks about you. She says you sat with her when she needed it, and you didn't make a big thing of it, which she said was important. I don't know your full situation, but I know what it looks like when someone is managing on their own. I've been doing it for a while myself. This card is not a lot. I know that, but I wanted you to know someone saw you. Please use it for something that isn't practical. Vivienne." Deo. Miriam put the letter down on her desk and looked out the window for a while. She was not a woman who accepted things easily. She had been managing. Carefully and deliberately, and part of the integrity of managing was doing it herself. She knew this. She also knew, in a place she was less comfortable with, that this particular form of pride had calcified into something that was no longer entirely noble. That refusing every offered hand was starting to look less like independence and more like a door she'd sealed from the inside. She used the gift card. Not for something practical. She bought a bottle of wine she'd been looking at for months, and hadn't bought because $15 for wine was $15. She bought a face cream that wasn't the store brand. She bought Petra a book she'd pointed at in the school book fair with large, wanting eyes, and then walked past. And when Petra unwrapped it that evening and looked up at Miriam with an expression of pure disbelief, "But I didn't even ask for it," Miriam said, "Someone was kind to us today." And Petra accepted this explanation entirely, because 6-year-olds understood that kindness arrived sometimes without needing to explain itself. She wrote back to Vivienne. She sat down with a piece of paper, actual paper. She had to look through a drawer to find some. And she wrote a letter back by hand, which she hadn't done in years. She didn't write a lot. She didn't try to describe the full shape of the last 2 years. She just wrote, "Dear Vivienne, thank you. You have a remarkable daughter, and from everything she's told me, she learned it from someone who worked very hard to teach her. I needed someone to see me this year. I didn't know I did until it happened. Thank you for raising someone who knows how. Miriam." She sealed it, and put it in Claudette's hand the following Monday. And Claudette put it in her backpack with the matter-of-fact solemnity of someone who understood she was carrying something important. The weeks that followed were not dramatically different. Miriam's situation did not transform. The furnace got fixed and it cost more than she'd hoped. She renegotiated the payment to her ex for the month of December, and hated having to but did it. Petra got a cold that became an ear infection, that became a prescription and a sleepless Wednesday night, with a small miserable person who wanted nothing except to be held by her mother, which Miriam did, all night, because some things you just did. But something had shifted, in a way that was real even when nothing around it had changed. She started sitting with other teachers at lunch sometimes. Not always, she still needed her quiet days, but sometimes. She started saying yes to the Tuesday walks around the track. Not every week. A few times a month. Enough to remember that she liked moving her body in the cold air, that she actually enjoyed the company of these people when she let herself be there for it. She finished her book. She started another one. She told her mother, on a Sunday call in January, some of it, not everything, but more than she usually said, about how it had been hard. About how an 11-year-old and a woman she'd never met had handed her something she hadn't known how to ask for. Her mother went quiet for a moment and then said, "Oh, Miriam," in the tone that mothers had, and Miriam said she was okay, which was now true in more lights than before. Yay. On the last day of school before the winter break, Claudette came by the classroom just before the afternoon bell. She had a small card with her, green, folded, with a drawing of a mug on the front with little heat lines rising from it. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," Miriam said. "Have a good break." "You too." Claudette lingered for a moment in the doorway. "Did you ever finish the book?" Miriam laughed, a real one, sudden, the kind she'd stopped expecting from herself. "I did, I started a new one." Claudette grinned. "Progress." "Yeah," Miriam said, "progress." After she left, Miriam opened the card. Inside, Claudette had written, "I hope this break you get to do something that's just for you. You deserve that. See." Miriam stood in her empty classroom in the quiet of the last afternoon of the term, with the winter light coming through the windows she'd papered with her students' snowflake art, and she held that card and she thought about what it meant to be seen, not saved, not rescued, not fixed, just seen. By someone who had no particular reason to look, except that she had the eyes for it, and the courage to use them. She thought about Vivienne, who'd worked a double shift in November and still found time to write a letter on paper. She thought about Petra, who gave her crayons away without asking for them back. She thought about the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix, and how somewhere over these past months, she'd started to feel a different kind. The normal kind, the kind that came from a full day and a life that was being actually lived, not just survived. She turned off the lights. She locked the door. She picked up Petra from aftercare. Running a little late, as always, the math still tight, the winter still cold, and her daughter threw herself at her with the complete bodily commitment of a 6-year-old, who had been waiting all day to do exactly this, and Miriam held on, and the two of them walked home through the early dark and the snow just beginning, their breath coming out in small clouds, their boots loud on the sidewalk, and for that moment there was nothing to manage. Just this. Just the two of them, and the sound of boots, and the snow coming down, and the year slowly turning toward something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like it might be okay. I keep thinking about that chamomile tea bag. Such a small thing, the kind that comes in the yellow box, still in its paper wrapper, and yet it's the detail I can't let go of, because it wasn't just a tea bag. It was a mother, somewhere across town, working 2 jobs and still finding the words to describe something I hadn't been able to name for myself in 2 years. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I don't know Vivienne, I've never met her, but she looked at her daughter and said something true, and her daughter carried it across a school and handed it to me. And that's how it reached me. Through 2 people who had every reason to be too exhausted to notice anyone outside their own hard lives. And who noticed anyway. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Claudette didn't have to write that first note. She could have gone back to class and let whatever happened in that break room dissolve into the noise of an ordinary school day. Nobody would have known. But she had the kind of character that noticed something and then did something about it. Quietly, without fanfare, without needing anyone to praise her for it. She was 11. She had her own problems, and she still folded a piece of paper and walked back to give it to a teacher she barely knew, because it felt like the right thing to do. I think about what it takes to become that kind of person. It doesn't happen accidentally. It comes from somewhere. From watching a mother who does right by people even when she's running on nothing, from learning that paying attention to the people around you is not a luxury but a practice. Claudette had been raised to see. Not just to look, but to actually see. That's not a small thing to pass on to a child. That's everything. And Miriam, I think about what it cost her to stay at that table. That first day when she sat down beside those kids instead of staying safe at her own corner. She was protecting herself and she moved anyway. That's what quiet courage looks like. Not dramatic, not certain. Just moving one table over when everything in you wants to stay still. What I've come to believe is that what we do for each other comes back around in ways we can't always trace. Miriam sat with a kid who needed not to feel invisible. That kid wrote a note. That note cracked something open in Miriam that had been sealed shut for a long time. And slowly, carefully, she started letting herself take up space again. Finishing her book, saying yes to the Tuesday walks, telling her mother something true on a Sunday call. None of it was a transformation. It was just a woman remembering, piece by piece, that she was allowed to be more than what she could survive. I believe that when we act with genuine decency, not because someone's watching, not because it's convenient, but because it's right, we set something in motion that doesn't stay contained. Claudette's honesty made Miriam braver. Miriam's presence made Claudette feel less alone. Vivian's letter made Miriam understand she was seen. One small act and then another, and then another. That's not a miracle. That's just what happens when people choose to show up for each other with their whole, tired, imperfect selves. If this story stayed with you, I think you already know why.